Hey guys, welcome back. If you're new here, my name is Becca and today I have my April wrap up. So I cannot lie, the month of April was rather slumpy for me. I did read 7 books in total, but when we get to the stats section of this video, you will see that I have read significantly less than I have read in the previous 3 months of this year. I knew it was coming with how much I was reading throughout the first few months. I knew that we would have a month where I didn't quite do as well. That being said, I think I am just generally reading more now. Like, I normally say that my average page count for a month is about 3,500 pages, and considering I was slumping this week, I'm still not too far away from that 3,500 page mark. So I do think that with my schedule and how I've rearranged my work schedule in 2021, I am just generally reading a little bit more. That being said, this month was just not it for me. I've been in a bad mood consistently for at least 2 weeks now, and it's burnout. I'm burning out, guys. I need some time off. I am taking a week off very soon, but essentially because of all of this stuff, all of this stress, my mind has just been going at like 100 miles per hour. I cannot concentrate on a book for the life of me. I'm sorry as well if my reviews throughout this video are not to my usual standard, because my brain just isn't there, you know. I have been playing a lot of video games because I found that they are something that I can do where I'm fully absorbed and in the moment for the time that I am playing those games. So I've been playing a lot of Fortnite as usual, and also a lot of Divinity 2 with Curtis, and I have also been working out. I worked out almost every single day this month. I think 5 days out of the 30 I didn't, which is perfectly reasonable, you know, because you shouldn't push your body past its limits. But once again, that is something that when I am in the moment, I am mainly focused on that. A lot of the time I'm focused on like, when is this pain gonna end? But it was something else that helped me to manage my stress throughout the month of April. And I can't lie, in terms of workload, April has not been overwhelming for me. It is just burnout. I'm running out of steam and I need to take a little bit of time to recharge. So I am doing that at the very beginning of May, and hopefully I will be back on it upon my return. Don't worry, you guys won't notice anything wrong. I am pre-filming and pre-scheduling all of my videos for that week. It's just mentally, I'm not going to be here. I'm going to be chilling out somewhere. So getting right into the stats, in the month of April I read 3,052 pages, which breaks down to an average of 102 pages per day. For the star ratings, we had 1 3-star read, 5 4-star reads, and 1 5-star read, which breaks down to an average of 4 stars per book. For the demographics, we had 2 young adult books and 5 adult. For the formats, we had 4 standardly formatted novels, 2 arcs, and 1 comic. For the genres, we had 5 fantasy, 1 romance, and 1 thriller. And finally, for the places where I sourced these books from, 3 of them were from my own TBR that existed prior to the start of 2021. 2 of them I have hauled in 2021, and 2 of them were from the publishers. So getting into the reviews, the first book that I read was Truthwitch by Susan Dennard. I read this because I am a co-host for the Witchlands Long, which is hosted by Jade from Jade Ray Reads, and we have done a live show for this book as well, so I will link that in my description box. It was an interesting one to watch. So this one I have put down in my spreadsheet as young adult. I went into it thinking it was adult or like new adult, bridging that gap, but I will say that it does read very YA, and there is no kind of like deciding factor on this. It is published in different age categories in different countries and on different like websites and stuff, so I just went with my gut on this one and put it in as young adult. But this one is a fantasy series where we are following 2 young women, Safi and Iseult, and Safi is a truth witch. Now there are lots of witches, different types of witches in this world, and a truth witch has the ability to tell when somebody is lying and when they are telling the truth, which makes their power extremely covetable. So Safi has been keeping her power a secret her entire life. There are only a handful of people who know, and all she wants to do is run away and start a new life with her best friend, away from all of the politics and all of the drama and the pressure of having to keep this secret. So they perform, I guess, like heists to make money or steal money so that they can have this future together. And one day when they are in the middle of this, they stumble across a blood witch, and a blood witch has the power to scent your blood and then track you across vast distances. So the blood witch cottons on to the fact that Safi is a truth witch, and from that moment on, Safi and Iseult are on the run. Now we do have very complex politics in this book as well, and there is something called a 20-year treaty that was made almost 20 years ago between a variety of countries, and it is about to come to an end, and the world may may possibly be thrown into chaos because of this. And while Safi and Iseult are on the run, they also end up tied up in this plot kind of accidentally. So I gave this one 4 stars. I did really enjoy it, but I will have to say that it was very close to a 3-star read. In my gut, it felt slightly better than 3 stars, but didn't feel quite like 4 stars. So I did have to like cross-check my rating many times before I decided on 4. So the thing about this book is that I feel like it has a great deal of potential. Well, I wouldn't say that the magic system in here is especially complicated. There are a lot of different types of witch. They're broken down into categories. There's different types of witch within each category. And the magic system in here hinges on thread. So all throughout this book, I was really struggling to grasp what a thread is because it's never concretely laid down on the page. But from what I can gather and from what I learned during the live show when we were having a discussion about how confused I was, a thread is the thread that ties an individual person to other people, the things around them, and also to like the world weave. So while Safi is a truth witch, Iseult is a thread witch, and she can see these threads between people. That is her power. Now, on top of my confusion with what exactly a thread was in the magic system, there is actually a very complex political system and political plot in here. And my main issue with this was that it is extremely fast paced. From the first page, the first chapter, you are kind of just thrown into it, and it never really slows down all that much. I felt like due to the fast-paced nature of this and the complexity of the politics, I spent the majority of this book really confused, not really having a grip on like who belonged to which political party and what powers everybody had. So even though the information was probably laid down earlier in the book, because I've just been thrown into this world, I don't know anything. Like, I don't know the characters, the magic, or anything, and all of this information is kind of just thrown at me. I felt like in my struggle to actually retain something, I had actually missed some of the more important points that are actually referenced later in the book. So it was just like a whole ton of confusion for me, and I definitely think that that could have been remedied had this book had a slower start. I definitely would have appreciated it a lot more if we had taken the time at the beginning to introduce the reader to the magic and the politics before we started in with this fast-paced plot, and I would definitely have had a better grip on what was going on here and also enjoyed the book a whole lot more. I did really like a lot about it though. I do really like the characters. I love Safi and Iseult. I think Merrick is my favorite character, and we also have Adrian in here as well, who is the Blood Witch, and I do think that he has a lot of potential to become one of my favorite characters further down the line. It is multi-perspective as well, so you do read from the perspective of all 4 of those characters. This one mainly focuses on Safi, and the sequel is Wind Witch. I think that is going to mainly focus on Merrick, so I'm really excited to read that one. But yeah, overall I feel like it was a promising read. I really enjoyed it, but at the same time I also had a lot of issues with it. I then participated in the 24-hour readathon, once again hosted by Jade at JD Ray Reads, and the first book that I read was Isola Volume 2 by Brendan Fletcher and Carl Kerschel. So this is a comic book series that I picked up I think last year because I adore the art in here. I also have a limited edition cover of the first volume from Traveling Man, which is absolutely stunning, but the art in here truly is just beautiful. There's also in this series, there is a lot of use of colour and colour washing to create mood throughout the panels, which I really enjoy, and you cannot deny that this is absolutely stunning to look at. So in this one we are following Captain Rook, who is the captain of the Queen's Guard, and Rook has to get the Queen to the mythical kingdom of Isola because the Queen has been cursed and turned into this big glowy blue tiger that you can see here. So I've read 2 volumes of this, and the format of it, or the structure of it I guess, is pretty much just their journey to Isola. So they will pass through certain places, they will meet certain people, there will be obstacles thrown in their way, but it is pretty much just a journey story at this point in the series. So I gave this one 3 stars, and I may have to admit, I am going to keep reading it at least for a couple more volumes, but I may have to admit that this story could just not be for me. And the reason for that is that I was always nervous about picking up comics before I started reading them because I don't process images very well. I don't appreciate art the way that some other people can, where you can go to a gallery and like pick out things like the brush strokes and like the mood and the tone that the artist is trying to convey. I just look at a picture and think that's a pretty picture. I also can't read diagrams to save my life. I am much better off with things that are text-based, and this comic book series relies on a lot of visual representation, and all comic books do, but this does not have a whole lot of text or a whole lot of dialogue in it. You will have pages where there's pretty much no text at all, and I just really struggle to focus on the story and actually understand what is happening when it is so image based. I did also mention earlier the use of color in here. There will be certain tones and certain colors that are representing things like visions or illusions or dream states, and I'm just not getting that information properly. I'm always second guessing myself, like, does this mean that it's not real? Is this real? Like, is this really happening? So I think just because of that, I can't get the full enjoyment out of this comic series, and it's really hard for me to rate because I don't know whether like it's not coming across very well, or whether because of how I struggle with imagery, I just can't quite grasp what's going on. But I do adore the art in here. I really like the concept. We had like a mini plot line in here that I really enjoyed, also sapphic representation in here, and some of the information we got in this one has thickened the plot a little bit. So I am going to continue. I may also reread the first 2 volumes when the next one is released and see if I can kind of get a better grasp on it, but this series just may not be for me. The second book that I read for a readathon was one of my most anticipated releases of the year, and that was You Love Me by Caroline Kepnes. This is the 3rd installment in the You series, which you may be familiar with as it has recently been adapted into a Netflix show. They've done 2 seasons already, and I'm really excited for season 3. But the first book follows a young man called Joe, and he seems like a decent guy, you know, like he's real thoughtful, real kind, real considerate. He reads a lot of books, he works in a bookstore, and just seems like a genuine guy, aside from the fact that he is also a stalker. And when a young woman walks into the store where he works, he becomes very quickly infatuated with her and does start to stalk her. So the first book is written entirely in second person perspective, so it's like you get on the bus, I watch you as you enter your house and things like that, so it does have that extra creep factor to it. But the thing that I really love about this series is that it puts you outside of your comfort zone into the mind of somebody who is not a good guy, and then makes you empathize with him and makes you sympathize with him, because a lot of the things that happen throughout the course of this series as a whole, but especially the first book, can be kind of relatable and really reminded me of like the teenage kind of infatuation that you have when you're much younger. But it's obviously just the methods and the way that Joe goes about things that are way out of line. So I really enjoy the perspective that this series puts you in. I gave the first 2 books 5 stars. I gave this one 4 stars. I didn't enjoy it quite as much. Every book kind of puts Joe into a new situation, and personal preference wise, the setting and situation of this installment in particular, I didn't love as much as I enjoyed the other 2. As well as that, the plot in here just gets a little bit too ridiculous in parts, and throughout the whole middle section there was just like bits of drama being added to this already really dramatic plot that I just thought were a little bit unnecessary. When we got towards the end of this as well, we had like new twists thrown in that just like blew my mind, because I thought that we were just like gonna wrap this up gently, and it just kept getting crazier. This book was also a little bit repetitive in that we were repeating things that we'd kind of already seen in the first 2 installments in this series, but I will say that Caroline Kepnes did put a new spin on a lot of those things. So like I was expecting them to go pretty much the same way they had when we'd seen them before, but they would go in a new direction that would leave me shocked. But honestly, I'm always down for more of Joe and what he's gonna do next, because this is a perspective that you're not going to get very often, and it's very entertaining to read, to see the kind of problems that he gets himself in when you're also kind of rooting for him and empathizing with him a little bit, knowing that he's the bad guy in every situation he's in, and you want him to succeed, and he'll make a stupid mistake and you'll like kind of chastise him and be like, why did you do that? But yeah, it's just a real interesting perspective to read from, which is why I love this series so much. But this one for me was just not quite as good as the first 2 installments. I then read a couple of arcs. The first one was Malice by Heather Walter. I had an art copy of this that was sent to me by by Del Rey, so thank you so much for that. And they also kindly sent me the finished copy as well. So I was really intrigued about this one because this is an adult fantasy Sleeping Beauty retelling from the perspective of an evil fairy, and it also has a sapphic relationship between the evil fairy and Aurora. So going into this, I was already hyped because I love retellings, I love villain origin stories or villain perspectives, and I was just really looking forward to a really dark story with like a background storyline that I was already familiar with. So first off, what I will say is that this is being published as adult, and I believe that is because Del Rey do pretty much exclusively publish adult books, but it doesn't really read as adult. So I would probably, like, if I was going with my gut feeling, I would say that this is new adult at best. Like, it reads like young adult, like upper young adult, so I'm not really sure what pushed it into the adult category. I do still think it's a really good book. I think it's a really solid book. I thoroughly enjoyed it, but just if you are going into this like I was, expecting a real dark, gritty adult fantasy, you're not quite gonna get that. It reads like young adult. So in here we are following a young woman called Alice, and she is the Dark Grace, and she lives in this society of graces. There's like a grace council and stuff, and essentially the graces perform tasks for their patrons. So each grace has a specialization. You have like your beauty graces that can like erase your blemishes and stuff, but Alice as the Dark Grace can only perform curses, and the reason for this is that she's not technically a grace. The graces have been gifted with fey blood, but Alice is half Vila, and Vilas are the monsters of this realm. They used to have like their own kingdom, but a war many years ago pretty much wiped them out. So Alice has kind of been kept with all of the graces, even though she isn't really one, and she's treated terribly by all of them. Everybody hates her, even though people will come to her and pay her money for her services. Nobody likes her or wants to be seen with her, and one day an invitation comes to Aurora's, I think, 20th birthday party, and it's a masquerade ball, so Alice decides to go because she can remain anonymous, and she ends up in a conversation with Aurora, which starts a partnership between those two, where Alice is going to try and help Aurora break the curse that has been placed on her bloodline, which states that if a member of the royal bloodline has not experienced true love's kiss by their 21st birthday, they will die. So I really enjoyed the setting of this and the world building. There were elements of the story that were quite, I want to say glamorous, but in a fairy tale manner. They reminded me a lot of like the capital in the Hunger Games, where you had like really brightly colored, like wild, outlandish things. Like people had dresses with like fish on, and the fish like moved around their dress, and they had like moving butterflies as headpieces and things like that. And I really enjoyed that fairy tale-esque whimsical little touch to the world building. There was also a lot more depth in the history and the lore of this than I expected, because you will find with a lot of retellings, you don't really have to do too much work to make it like a deep, believable fantasy story, because the reader already knows all of the basics and all the groundwork going in. But I feel like Heather Walter really made this story her own by adding like a really rich lore and a decent backstory to this. My criticism of it is that it definitely could have gone darker. I really like my dark stories. I love grimdark fantasy and all of that kind of stuff, so I do feel like it could have gone darker in those aspects, but then that could also be a case of expectation versus reality, because I was expecting this to be a little bit more adult going into it, which generally does come with a lot darker themes. I also really enjoyed a lot of the discussion in here about things like nature versus nurture. We had some really dynamic characters that, like, one thing throughout this I felt is that I couldn't trust anybody. Like, I just had a deep feeling that somebody was going to betray Alice, and I just really could not figure out which one it was going to be. And I really liked reading from Alice's perspective. I really felt for her, you know, because I always want to read villain origin stories and things like that, but I always forget that the transition from like a general person to a villain can be quite painful to read, because it's normally the result of like years of bullying and trauma and like bad things happening that really push the person over the edge. And this is as well going to, I think, be a duology, so I'm really excited for the sequel, because the ending of this was quite fast-paced, and I'm wondering how it's going to kind of circle back around and wrap up in the sequel. The second arc that I read was Dream Country by Shay Brown. This was sent to me from the publisher, which is Ennui, so thank you so much for that. And I do actually have, it came with this art card in like a promotion promotional box. So this is the final cover if you guys are interested. It's really good, I would recommend. So this one is a young adult fantasy that is inspired by Kenyan, Jamaican, Brazilian and Grecian mythology, and we are following 3 gods that are triplets, and they are the gods of dreams, sleep and nightmares. So once upon a time they all used to live together up until they were around 6 years old when their mother died, and they all became suspects in her murder. Now they all assume that one of them must have killed their mother, but none of them knows which one, and nobody else knows like what actually happened when their mother died. So since the murder of their mother, they've all been separated and they all rule over different realms, and these realms have been separated by gates of horn and ivory for the last, I think, 13 years, up until the god of dreams finds a baby in his kingdom with a cry that has the power to shake the gates. So there is a big event happening in the world that happens on the god's birthdays. The god years are like a few hundred human years, so it's like every god year but not every human year, and when that happens the gods go to earth and they pick somebody to bring back to their realms with them. So the gods all go down to earth to find this baby who has the power to change their lives as they know it. So this is a very unique story, and it has a very different plot structure than your typical young adult fantasy. It is kind of, I want to say, like a moralistic story, but not in like a really patronizing way. It's just a book that is more about the experience of the story than the final point where everybody ends up. So my favorite things about this book were the atmosphere and the world building. This is a very unique world. I'm not especially familiar with Kenyan, Jamaican or Brazilian myth, and I'm not even that familiar with Grecian myth, so I can't say that I particularly picked up on any individual references throughout here, which I am kind of sad about, just because I really like Easter egg hunting in books. But that is completely on me for not being familiar with mythology. It's very possible that the references are in there and plain as day, it's just that I couldn't see them because I don't know the original mythology. But I really liked how that created this really rich atmosphere. This book is also extremely well written, and I just loved being in the world, learning about this system, the way that the humans worship the gods, because this book is entirely from the perspective of the gods, and how they actually live their lives like in parallel to how they're worshipped, if that makes sense. I also really loved exploring the realms. We are mainly following the god of dreams in this one, and we get a little bit of the god of nightmares, and one thing that I was really sad about is that we didn't really get the perspective of the only female god in here, which is the god of dreams. We did have a little bit of exploration of the dream realm, but I would really have liked to have read from her perspective. And overall I just think that it was incredibly well written, incredibly atmospheric, and if you like stories with a rich atmosphere and a very mythological vibe similar to Gods of Jade and Shadow by Sylvia Moreno Garcia, I think that you will really enjoy this one. I then read Red, White and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston. This was my punishment read for not completing March's Bookopoly, and I'm sure a lot of you guys are already familiar with this one because it is incredibly popular. But it is a new adult queer romance between the son of the United States of America and a Prince of England in this alternate kind of reality where the president of the United States is a woman. It's weird actually because we have a fictionalized royal family in here, but something that I didn't really like about this book is that for the 3 siblings who are like the youngest, I guess, tier of the royal family at the moment in this, they actually used names that are names of existing members of the royal family. So the main character Henry, like Prince Harry's real name is Henry, then we have Beatrice, who is Prince William's cousin in like the real royal family, and then we have Prince Philip, who was the Queen's husband who just recently passed away. So that was a little bit odd because when these characters were mentioned I was thinking about like the real members of the royal family that have those names. Going into it I expected it to be kind of like a rom-com, and there are definitely lots of rom-com elements in here. There are moments of humor, I was laughing out loud, there was like cute elements to the romance. I did think that like that whole romance between these two was generally quite sweet overall. But something that I personally really love in romance that I didn't really expect from this is like a lot of drama and angst. And I will say there wasn't like a whole ton of it, but there was this whole scene throughout the middle that was really dramatic, really angsty. We had characters like outside in the rain, like being real dramatic, and generally I just enjoyed that whole thing because like I said, you guys know me, I really like my dramatic angsty romances. In terms of it being being a romance and being like cute and sweet and making me feel good. It hit all of those points. There were points towards the end of this where I got real emotional and I like almost teared up. But my one criticism of this really, and it is because I am a British reader, it's just very focused on US politics, because the main character that we are following is the son of the President of the United States, and he himself is also interested in politics. Now, I know nothing but the very bare basics of American politics, so half of it didn't even make sense to me, because it is very clear that the readership that this book is targeted at are US citizens who know like more advanced basics, I want to say, as like a bare minimum of US politics than I do. So a lot of that went right over my head. It is quite chunky for a romance as well. It's like 412 pages. I feel like it could have been shorter, but once again, that would have been shaving off a lot of the politics, which is actually integral to this story. I also really enjoyed that this book explored queerness not only in the public eye, but also in an institution like the royal family, where, like, thinking about it now, I don't think there is a single openly queer member of the British royal family. And with how many members there are with like the extended branches of the royal family, it does seem like the like homophobia of the royal family portrayed in this is something that could be realistic. Now, I'm not saying that it is, and not like speculating on that or anything, but it's just really brought to my attention that I don't think I know of any openly queer members of our current royal family, which directly feeds into a lot of the themes in this book. So yeah, really enjoyed it. If it's something you've been interested in, would recommend picking it up. I will say as well that while I do really love it and I gave it 4 stars and it was a real enjoyable experience, the reason why this was a punishment read for me is because I didn't think I would dislike it. I just had no interest in it, and after reading it, I don't think my life would be any less. Like, I don't think I would be especially missing out if I hadn't read this. But that being said, it's still a real good book and I enjoyed my time reading it. And then the final book that I read in the month of April was the Well of Ascension by Brandon Sanderson. It's been a long time coming. I read The Final Empire at the very end of April last year. I think I finished it with a few minutes of April to spare, and I finished this with a little bit more of April to spare this time. But this is the second book in the Mistborn series by Sanderson. It's one of the books / series in the Cosmere, and in the first book in this series, The Final Empire, we are following a man called Kelsier who is trying to overthrow the Dark Lord and the Final Empire. So he's putting together this team of allomancers to perform a heist. Allomancy in this world is what the magic system is called, and you ingest metals and harness the power of those metals. They manifest in different ways, like you can push and pull on objects, which leads to like these really cinematic fight scenes where like the characters are like flying around everywhere as they're like pushing and pulling on bits of metal. There are also metals that like enhance your senses, and the majority of people who have the power of allomancy, like there aren't many allomancers to start off with, but the majority of them can only harness the power of one metal. But then you also have Mistborns who have the power to harness all of the metals. So Kelsier is putting together this team. He himself is a Mistborn, and he stumbles across a young girl called Vin who has something which she thinks is luck. Like, she thinks she has a lucky streak because she's actually metabolizing little bits of metal found in water and using allomancy, but she doesn't know that she's an allomancer at all. However, Kelsier recognizes the potential in her and thinks that she may be a Mistborn, so he takes her under his wing, and she then joins the team that will be overthrowing the Final Empire. So the sequel picks up, I think, maybe a year or so after the events of the Final Empire. I can't really tell you anything about the plot of this one because it is vastly different from the plot of the first one, and anything I said would just kind of give away how the first book wraps up. But this is very slow and very political and character driven throughout the bulk of it. So this is 760-ish pages, and I would say that the first 500 pages is mainly politics and character growth. I can say as well that communication is just not a thing in this book. The plot in this one is kind of all going in different tangents, and the reason for that is that the characters are not communicating with each other. A lot of the things that they're all going through is internalized. As they are growing, they're like focusing in different directions and growing into new people, focusing on new areas of their life, which I guess has caused them to lose touch a little bit with the people in their life that they were closest with before. And because of that, everyone's kind of growing apart a little bit, and a lot lot of the stuff in this book wouldn't have happened if the characters were talking to each other, because you will see like a lot of conflicting information in here. Like in one character's perspective, they believe a certain thing about something, and then in another character's perspective, they believe a different thing about that same thing because they just have not spoken to each other. So it is very rare that a Sanderson book does not have a point, and for the longest time reading this, I was struggling to find what the point was. I didn't know what direction this book was going to be after the end of the Final Empire, and it took me a while to figure out the direction that it was going in because of how slow the beginning of this book was. Now that being said, I did not find it unenjoyable while I was reading it, because I've read a lot of Sanderson books now, and just his writing style is extremely comforting to me. It's familiar to me, so I can enjoy just the act of reading one of his books, especially a Cosmere book. Like the Skyward books are a little bit different in style, but the Cosmere books all have a very familiar writing style to me, so I thoroughly enjoyed just being back in this world, back with these characters and reading another Sanderson book. But I will say that those first 500 pages are extremely slow, and it seems like not a lot is happening. Now in comparison to that, there is a lot that happens in the last 200 pages of this book, and my mind was blown. There is a question running throughout this book for, I want to say, the entire time, and when I found out the answer, my mind was blown. As usual, the reveals in here are so obvious that you kick yourself because you didn't get them. If you are unfamiliar with how Sanderson writes, the main thing with Sanderson is that there's always another secret. So if you think you know everything that's going on, there is always going to be another secret that is revealed a little bit later on. But something else, like with his structure and his writing style, all of the information that you actually need to be able to guess the plot twist ahead of time is laid out very early on in the book, and if you actually zoned in on that information, then the reveals wouldn't come as much of a surprise to you. But Sanderson is also a master of misdirection, so he'll lay down this information and then something else will happen in the scene that's more interesting, that seems more important, or the character that you're reading from the perspective of attention will be diverted onto something else, which makes you as a reader very quickly divert your attention as well away from the actual crucial information. So when it comes to the reveals, you will remember that you have actually had this information given to you real early on, but you just did not see it. And even now, even though I know that, even though I know how important the details are in these books, I'm still blown away every single time. They still get me, even though I know to look for them. I know that the information I need will come in the first few chapters, or like much earlier than the reveal. Still gets me every single time. But I'm really excited to read The Hero of Ages. It's not going to be another year. It's not going to be another year until I pick up The Hero of Ages. I gave this one 5 stars, but I will say it was a low 5 stars. The Final Empire was one of my favorite books of last year, but this one, with just how slow it was, wasn't quite like way up there with like the Final Empire and Oathbringer, which are my favorite Sanderson books, but I still thoroughly enjoyed it, and I'm just really excited after the end of this and the reveals to see what happens in The Hero of Ages, because I think it's going to take a very different direction again, and I'm excited to see how the series wraps up, because a lot of you guys have said that the end of this series is like one of your favorite series endings ever, and I still haven't actually. At this point, having read about 8 or 9 Sanderson books, I still haven't read a conclusion to a series. So that is it. Those are the 7 books that I read in the month of April. Fingers crossed I'm going to do a little bit better in May. That being said, I do have a week off in May, so if I'm not reading, I'm not reading, and I'm not going to put any pressure on that in that week. But I do hope I do better, because consciously, like, I want to read, it's just when I try, it's just really not happening for me. But in the comments, please let me know if you've read any of the books that I've spoken about today and what you thought about them. And aside from that, please don't forget to like this video if you liked it, and subscribe if you wanna. If you head into my description box, you'll find a link to my Goodreads, Instagram and Twitter if you'd like to follow me on any of those, as well as a link to my Bookish body butter and candle website, the Instagram for that, and a 10% off discount code. But that's it from me today, guys. Bye!
Oh, you bite your friend like chocolate. You say you'll go where nobody knows, with guns hidden under our petticoats. We're never gonna quit it, no, we're never gonna quit it, no.